a very strange thing that is from IMB. I joined HMT Watches, which was a public sector enterprise.
Welcome everybody to yet another episode of the Chai Pe Career podcast. Today I have with me a very distinguished guest who I also have the privilege of calling my mentor and professor because I am undergoing a program at IIM Bangalore where she's teaching. Miss Malavika Harita, ex-founder, CEO of Saatchi and Saatchi Focus, which she set up from scratch and grew, and also on the board of governors for IIM Bangalore. And
Vizag.
I am Vizag, and multiple other places where she teaches. She's passionate about marketing and communications, mentors startups, especially women-founded startups. And I'm so privileged, ma'am, to have you here with us today after, your distinguished career to actually talk to millennials and Gen Zs about the future of work. That's the theme that we're going to speak about today. So, starting off with your education, you went to the Hallowed Institute, IIM Bangalore. How was it there back in the day? And maybe you can run us through your student years.
All right. Thank you, Srirupa. Thank you for having me on this podcast. And it'll be my privilege to talk to the younger generation. I do teach extensively, and I've been doing this for the last 30 odd years. So I actually love the millennials and Gen Z and everything in between. When I started at IIM, it was in 1980. And firstly, management was very new at that point. And it was a very interesting dynamic because we were 3 women and 103 guys. So there was no such thing as gender equality or balance. But I don't think I had a problem with that at all because I fitted in. It took me it takes you about 2-3 months, even today, to fit into the hothouse, which is an IIM system. And this is across all the locations that they are at, including Bangalore. It takes you about 2-3 months to get used to this, unless you are from an IIT background where it is a similar kind of setup. For me, it was a bit of a culture shock because I came from a university system and I was one of the very few non-engineers. In my day, we had about 80 to 90% engineers. There were just 10% of us who were not. We were also, as I said, 3 to 103 women. So it was a bit of a change, but you got used to the hang of it very, very soon. Some of the subjects were obviously alien because I was a science graduate, but I learned pretty fast. But what the important part was that once I finished my graduation, I had a couple of years of accountancy training, and I used to run our family business. My dad died the day after I finished my degree, and I had to work with my mom on our family business to keep us afloat. And that's when I actually got very interested in this whole concept of business. Now, we did well, but I realized that I was doing it instinctively rather than knowing what I was doing. And that was one of the reasons I decided to do an MBA. I also decided that finance was not my cup of tea. And I said that this gave me a much broader horizon, though I have a double major in marketing and finance. So I kept my interests going, but I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So it was a very interesting time. And I think I learned a lot. The 2 years were really hectic. And we were on the go all the time with projects and all the other things that you need, exams and quizzes and whatever. But what was very nice is we had some very brilliant teachers. We had Professor Apte. We had Professor M.R. Rao, who unfortunately passed away a couple of days ago. We had Indra Rajaraman, who was on the RBI board. We had Professor Tirunarayan. So we had some amazing teachers who actually taught because they loved teaching and wanted to impart knowledge to us. So that was a very nice 2 years. In fact, I was pretty happy. And once you got used to IMB, there was nothing like it. We weren't in this lovely new campus that they have now with all the trees. It looks like it's a living forest, actually. So we weren't there. We were in Langford town in a set of rented buildings. But I think we all had a great time. And what is very important is that I had such a diverse bunch of students, my cohort. We had so many different kinds of people, and we're still friends after 80, right? So I think most of my audience wasn't even born or wasn't even thought of. Their parents must have been about 10 when we passed out in 82. But so many of us are still very deep friends, and I kept learning. What was amazing was I learned how to run the business. I learned so many new aspects. 2 subjects I didn't like were economics. Macro and microeconomics were not my cup of tea, though I did well. But it was quite fun, quite tough. And then, of course, I got recruited from campus into HMT Watches. And that was a different experience, which I'll tell you about.
Lovely. So why don't we then jump right in to your experience in your first job? Was it what you had expected, or was it completely different? How was it?
I did a very strange thing. That is, from IMB, I joined HMT Watches, which was a public sector enterprise. That was the heyday of HMT. And as a young, I was called marketing officer, I think. I was allowed to do so many things that even senior people in private companies were not allowed to do. But the only thing with the PSU, you had to follow a process. They're very clear about the money and all of that. But that apart, I had so much freedom to operate. And my 6.5 years in HMT were actually such a great learning exercise. Contrary to what you hear about PSUs are actually great training grounds. They teach you a lot. And what I learned from HMT was the love of process. I strongly believe that strong organizations need a very clear process without becoming bureaucratic. And that's what I've carried forward with me into my Saatchi days and all the other organizations that I worked with. So that was something I learned. The other thing I learned was we launched so many new variants of watches. Those, we didn't have AI and the internet even. So when you went to meet customers, you'd actually go and meet them face to face. So I remember I used to trudge all over the country meeting customers. We used to go to all the watch markets, to the watch retailers, and everything was done by us. And then we'd come back and report. And there was so much freedom. And I learned so much. I was into it. In fact, Shri, we launched quartz watches in the country. HMT was so ahead of its time. We launched quartz watches into the country. And unfortunately, and that was where I think HMT started declining, we didn't take advantage of what was happening in the marketplace. And that's where Titan walked in, which, by the way, was full of ex-HMT people. They kind of took the market because I remember our slogan was the timekeepers to the nation, right? And that had changed. A very funny story, and a lot of people agree with me when I tell them this and say that they had the same experience. Our first watch in those days was an HMT watch, which was given to you when you went for your 10th standard examination. So all of us had a large watch clasped onto our wrist, which our father would give us, and then take back at the end of the examination in case we spoiled it, and given to us the next day. Nowadays, kids have 5 watches before they're 5. So this watch, and we had HMT Sona, I think it was called, big big watch which we used to very proudly walk around with, only for the exam. After that, it was taken back. And most of us of my generation had that experience. So coming back to what I was telling you,
we had that with the Titan watches.
you had that.
My generation.
You got a Titan.
Yeah.
All right, we got an HMT. And the funny part was, I think that's where we missed the boat. The consumer changed. The consumer started seeing a watch not as a timekeeper, because HMT's thing, was timekeepers to the nation, but as a fashion accessory. And that's where the whole, the story chain, the narrative chain, and HMT became very slow. A lot of wrong decisions at the top levels. And that's when Titan kind of came in. And it was very sad because they own quartz watches. But I remember we launched it. I was part of that launch. We launched it, but we missed the boat because the consumer trends had changed from being a watch to a fashion accessory.
Wow, that's a great learning also for brands as to how to stay relevant. I mean, you have to constantly adapt to why the consumer will buy you. I mean, you might have started off as something, but you can evolve and your story can evolve. So that's a great lesson as well. And then how did you join Saatchi and Saatchi, and then the journey to Saatchi and Saatchi
and
Focus?
Then so that was interesting. About 6.5 years into HMT, I had a baby, right? So my son was born at that point. And I realized that I was the best nanny he could ever have. So I decided to take a few years off from work and bring him up, because I couldn't find a nanny who met mine and my mother's expectation. So I said, let me be that nanny. And that's what I did, which was a very interesting exercise in itself, because I also started, the entrepreneurial bug bit me at that. So I decided, let me start my own unit. We already had a family business which was into manufacturing packaging. And now I decided to expand that into interiors. And I also decided to look at exports and other stuff, right? So I said, okay, let me spend a little time doing that. And that was an interesting part, because I remember when I was doing interiors, and it was pretty successful, mind you. I learned to draw and design. I have a sense of design anyway. So I learned to do that. And the main advantage was I could carry Chaitanya around with me in his little bag. And I take him with me on all the sites, etc. And that went on for about 3.5 years. I was focused on that. But at that point, I realized that I wasn't using my MBA. This was before the startup boom. If I started in today's world, I'd probably be an entrepreneur. But those days, it wasn't so easy. And I also needed to go back because I wanted a regularity of income, which was important for me. So I decided to go back to my corporate career, and I wasn't using my degree at all because I had become an interior designer, which was way out there. So while it gives you a load of money, I don't think it really, helps the cerebrum too much. So I decided to go back to work, and that's when I joined Mudra as an account director. And then after that, 1.5 years later, I switched to Saatchi. Now, kids today laugh because I was in Saatchi for 25 years. I actually retired or decided to not renew my contract in my 25th year in Saatchi, which is a very long time. And most of my millennial and Gen Z students say, oh my God, they look at me like I'm a dinosaur. And I keep telling them the reason I stayed in Saatchi was they allowed me to be something else, and that's called an entrepreneur. So I was allowed to be an entrepreneur in residence, get a monthly paycheck, keep starting new divisions and groups and all within the Saatchi, including Focus. And whenever I got bored, I could start something new. And I never felt the desire to leave Saatchi because it was such a wonderful place. It was like my home. So I really love the place, and it is what I call my love mark.
Yeah.
Love mark is a very strong concept, which is love, which is the emotional angle, but more importantly, the respect you have for an organization. So Saatchi has always been my love mark, and I really enjoyed it. And I was an entrepreneur with a monthly paycheck. You can't get better than that, can you? So I really love that.
Yeah, that doesn't
And,
happen too often.
and I lived in Bangalore. And I could come home for lunch because my office was just down the road. So what fun. I mean, nobody can beat that, right?
Yes, we are all envying this. I think, the freedom that you got. In fact, I had also got a similar role. As I told you in my business world stint, I was actually allowed to launch a media vertical.
Mm.
But I know that a lot of my corporate friends actually complain about the fact that they don't have that ability to start something and to see it grow. I think
Yeah.
it's human nature to actually want to do something like that. So yeah, so that's great. And when you were in advertising and marketing, what did you like about it? Like, did you like the creative aspects of it, or did you like the business development aspects of it, or did you like the organizational aspect of it, running the show? Which part excited you the most, and why?
Okay. People ask me why I got into advertising because it isn't paid. The pay is not very good, and that's what the industry is suffering from currently. Um, so everyone thought I was mad to get an MBA from IIM Bangalore and then join an ad agency. But I fell in love with advertising. And this is a little bit of advice I give all my young students. In my other academic avatar, I teach about 750 kids a year. So I always tell my students that if you are lucky enough and blessed enough to love what you do, then this work-life balance and all of this just disappears. So I fell in love with advertising in my second year at IMB, and I have never, ever fallen out of love with it. And also for me, money has never been a big trigger. I mean, I don't want to be poor and live in a slum, but that has never been my trigger for success. I've always been very happy and contented with whatever I have. So advertising was very exciting. So in HMT, I was on the client side, which is a very different ball game. And then I wanted to see the other side, which is the agency side, which is very different, where you actually get to do stuff, right? And I rose pretty quickly because I worked very hard. So though I was 4 years behind because of my sabbatical with when I was bringing up my son, I sort of picked up 6 months. I got there where all my classmates were. You know, being from an IIM, you're a little competitive, especially when you're younger. You're a little competitive. You want to keep up with the cohort. And I managed that in 6 months. I worked really hard and came up to the level they were all at. Advertising, what I liked about it obviously was the creative, but what I liked about it was the freedom it gave me to strategize, to build creative, to manage the whole place, to manage accounts, to manage clients, to build businesses. So it wasn't just the one thing. And I was lucky enough to work in an agency which was not too huge. It was a smaller agency. So we were not compartmentalized, and it was great fun because you could do everything. I wasn't, I write fairly well, but copywriting, and of course, I understand art. I have an art aesthetic as a designer, but I don't do art. But it was so nice to be part of the whole process that I enjoyed. But having said that, I also like the client part. I like the business development part, and I like running an agency. So I'm one of those very strange people who kind of likes the wholesomeness of running a business and of working in a business. And Saatchi gave me that.
So it was not that you were not part of the creative aspects. You were a part of that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because the creative strategy is to come from us account management people, right? And then we had to go and sell it to clients. And, I grew up in an era where you were encouraged to strategize and do. So in today's world, what has happened, which is very sad in advertising, we first of all removed media, right? So media went away. Then creative became separate. And in creative, you had operations and you had strategy. So we have three distinct things happening. And then you had your creative. And what has happened, and I think that is, I believe, the tragedy of advertising today, is these silos that they have built, where one person doesn't know what the other does. And advertising is a very intimate business at the end of the day. It's all about creativity. And I don't think this sort of structure is good for it. Right? And now you've got digital and you've got PR. In our day, we used to do everything. And we did it well. It wasn't that it was poorly done. It was done excellently because we saw results. Right. But I think these silos didn't quite work for me. And I think one of my biggest strengths is that I had an overview of everything and I learned to do everything. For example, I remember in our days, we didn't have digital technology. So when you had to release an ad, and we were into print in a very big way. So when you had to release a print ad or send out a cassette to Doordarshan, you actually had to go and, send it through a courier. It was a physical thing that had to go. And I remember at 2:00 in the morning, driving quickly to FedEx or DHL to hand over the positives so that they could be sent to Reach Times of India, Bombay the next morning. They were put in the overnight flight. We had courier. We didn't have couriers then, but we had cargo ships, cargo planes. So it used to go off in the night. And then morning, we would be tensely biting our nails because our guy had to go and get it. It had to be delivered. And then the ad would appear the next. So I've done all of that. And I think that was the nice part of my job. That's why
the fun of it.
Yeah. The fun of it. That's why I think one of my biggest strengths is I can think, but I can do. And I think for all young leaders, you have to do both. And that's what I tell all my young students. You must learn to do.
Yeah.
Because right now it's infra-day to do. You want to sit in an office, air-conditioned office, and keep working on your laptop. And that's not enough. Get out there, meet customers, do.
Yeah.
And that's how you actually learn. So one of my pieces of advice to all my young friends who are watching this podcast is please learn not just to think and sit in an air-conditioned office building a PowerPoint presentation, but get out there and do, execute what you are proposing. I think that's very, very important. You must go out into the market. You must talk to the customer face to face, and you must learn to do as well as you think. Because as you go higher and higher up the corporate ladder, particularly, people who are able to get the bigger picture, who are able to think and do, are going to be the leaders of the future.
Lovely. What a lovely message for everyone out there. And I think we do tend to get lost sometimes in working in silos as well, sitting in a computer and hoping everything falls in place. But, it's important. And I'm so glad I'm doing this podcast, coming out here and meeting you in person instead of doing it virtually out of a box. I think the experience is very different when, we do it in person as well, having a chat like this in person. So going back to your journey, this is something you had mentioned in class for us, that you had some mentors who've shaped your life and, in fact, your career. And I think they were men. And you spoke to a bunch of women founders on how these men really helped you. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Okay. So I call them what was that Wonderful Four? What is the name of that movie? Super Four, Wonderful Four. Yeah. So I call them my four superheroes. And they were all my bosses at various stages of my career. And one of the funny things is that's why perhaps I think and talk a lot like a man. People tell me that I'm not, very feminine in the way I approach things. And that's because my whole thought process has actually been shaped by these four men. So my first boss in HMT was a gentleman called V.T. Narendra. And he taught me how to navigate this whole public sector system and learn from it. So he was a great teacher, and he used to push me very hard to go out into the market, to talk to people. And he also gave me a lot of freedom as long as I kept within the guardrails that he'd set up, because I was, after all, a young officer at that point. But VT is still a very dear friend of mine. And VT and I worked together for years in HMT before I left. So almost all my 6.5 years, he was my boss. So he was my first mentor. And I think I learned a lot from him, especially about consumer research, consumer behavior, advertising. At the other end, I worked with an agency called Sisters. And there was a gentleman there called Arijit Ghosh, who later, when I worked with Sisters, was also my boss. But Arijit gave us he worked with both VT and me, and he talked about advertising from the other side. And it was very interesting because Saatchi allowed me, or Sisters as it was then called, allowed me into their system. So I also figured out as we went along, I'm not a typical client sitting in my office. I spent most of my time with Sisters. And it was such an amazing experience because I learned how the creative process works. And that's what got me hooked into that. Later on, when I joined advertising proper, after I left HMT and I joined Sisters, which then became Saatchi, which was bought by Saatchi, I had two amazing mentors. One was a guy called Shanta Kumar. And Shanta was one of the most brilliant advertising people I had ever met, right? What was amazing about him, and that's who I kind of modeled myself on, he was both a strategist and a creative writer. He was actually the creative director of the agency. He had an idea every minute, and it was tiring to work with him, actually, because he didn't suffer fools. He was very, very forthright. And if he didn't like something, he told you to your face or fired the life out of you. But I was quite a solid, resilient person because it does take a lot of guts to face Shanta. He's super intelligent. But I did. And I think I learned so much from him. I will never forget that. The creative part came from him. And then I had his CEO, guy called Shubhabrata Ghosh, we call him SG. SG was the one who sort of tutored me on strategy, managing clients, making presentations, and all of that. And he was another great guy. And I had a lot of fun with him as well, because he taught me the how you could actually push strategy in various directions. The fourth gentleman, who was a much quieter version, these Shanta and SG were really over the top, and they were bigger than life, right? Larger than life. But Arijit, who ran the Bangalore branch, and I took over from him later, was a very quiet person. But he was the person who gave me my passion for detail. And those days PowerPoint had just come in. So we used to make acetate sheets, which we put on an overhead projector. And I remember sitting up all night building those, getting it printed, and then rushing.
So these were what, decks?
Decks.
Presentation
so
decks?
We didn't have a computer then. Right. I mean, you did it on a desktop, and then you took acetate printouts of the material, and then you put it on an overhead projector. We didn't have slide projectors like we have now. We had an overhead projector. So you had to keep it on the glass, and then it would get projected on the screen. And for a presentation, you'd have 300-400 of them, and you had to put it in order and carry it. And sometimes the damn thing would fall down, and we'd be, brushing them up from the carpet. But Arijit gave me my sense of detail. He was very detailed. He was from IIT Kharagpur, very particular about formatting and all of that. He also taught me how to run an agency, the finances and all of that. So later on, when
boring parts.
Absolutely. The boring parts. But he made the boring parts quite interesting. And I realized that the boring parts were absolutely essential because the high from advertising is about 5 minutes. The rest of the time, you are actually working at it. So these are the 4 guys who kind of shaped my mind.
Were they like your 4 madmen? You know madmen?
Yeah, they were like that. I call them my super 4. And sometimes I catch myself swearing like Shanta and SG too. And I have to control it because, a lot of words used to fly around. So sometimes I end up speaking like them. And the other day it was very funny. I'd invited SG to come to one of my classes to give a guest lecture. And at the end of the session, my student said, "But ma'am, you speak just like him."
So you're the fifth madman.
A mad woman. So it was fun.
Lovely. And how do you think advertising is shaping up now with all these influencers on all these social media profiles? So it's changed quite a bit, right? You don't have specific mediums anymore, and you have influencers who are creating content for brands. How do you think advertising will shape up going forward?
Advertising is in a mess, if you ask my very frank opinion. It's in an absolute mess, right? And the reason for that is because of clients perhaps not paying enough. So the money you used to have earlier, because we used to do a lot of TV commercials and stuff like that, has come down, right? So the commissions, the retainers, all of that have got very squeezed. So advertising is not invested in people who can think. The think power of advertising has gone down tremendously. And with the result that today, the whole thing has changed. And now with digitization, media being separate, and now, of course, with your AI, ML, all of that, the human element of creativity has come down dramatically. Right? So the kind of people that can be hired, that you can afford to hire, is of very low quality, because you can only hire good people if you pay them the big bucks, right? So if you can't pay them the big bucks, for example, you don't get anyone from IIM anymore. They can't afford us. So I remember when I joined advertising, everyone, the whole cohort, including SG, everyone had an MBA from one IMB or C or A. And the clients were equally well qualified, right? So it was such a pleasure to have these intellectual discussions on things, which doesn't happen now. The think power has been completely eroded. And the owner of the brand today is not the agency, which is the sad part, because they used to be the brand custodians, right?
And how do we bring it back? Is there a way?
I'm not very sure that it is ever going to come back to where it used to be. I think those days of glory with Piyush Pandey and Josie Paul, I think those have, and Alec Padamsee, they had some great people in the business. I think that era has passed. But what I'm propagating is that you do need AI and you need tech. You definitely need tech. But on the tech, you need to add the layer of consumer insights. And that only humans who understand people can do. And I think that's the future of advertising. The digital part is there to stay. But I think a sort of realignment of creative, digital, everything together, media.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think advertising should be re-christened as content creation.
No, as communication. Sorry.
Yeah? Okay.
It's
Yeah,
about,
well.
it should be brand narrative.
Right.
Right? So instead of being emotional, it has become transactional. See, the thing that digital has done to advertising, your ad tech and all of that, is they made it very transactional. So if you do your A/B testing, you realize that A works. And how does A work? By building more sales and conversions. A doesn't work by building those emotional connects. So I've been writing about this, and I think that data there to stay. Data. You have your digital, which does the operations part, but the human part is where the consumer inciting comes in. And that consumer inciting can only come if
from humans.
The young people go out into the market and talk to real customers.
And do you think the same agencies that were advertising agencies earlier can still manage influencers and content created by influencers, or that has to be separate?
No, I think it's all part of the creative process. The influencers and the content producers should actually be integrated into the entire brand system. See, the brand, you had the agency, you had the client, and you had the consumer, right? With only three players earlier. Now that agency has expanded into so many, it's fragmented, right? And then you have the client who's also fragmented because you have all these departments and silos and everything. The consumer per person is the same, right? So because of this fragmentation, I think there has to be a sort of, it no longer works with one agency. It has to be an ecosystem, but that ecosystem has to have what I call a brand custodian. You need to have some person who owns the brand. I remember there was this story when we were younger, the late Zexis Desai of Titan. He was the brand custodian of Titan. And every time there was a campaign, I believe Mr. Desai used to approve every transparency that was printed. Every photograph of Titan watches was approved by him before it went into print, because he was a printer by profession. He used to run Tata Press. And I thought that was amazing. And he was the brand custodian. But I think in today's world, brands don't have an owner. You know?
Right. Not even within the brand like the
they
company.
They have a manager. They have an account manager, which is very different from being a brand custodian. I think that custodianship has to come back. With the customer as the focus, that custodianship has to come back.
Wow, very, very interesting.
I know, and a bit too profound maybe, but
I mean, we are chatting about the future of work. So now we are chatting about the future of advertising and brands. Going back to brand custodianship in those days, what was an interesting ad campaign that you worked on that you recall? The one I love the most, ma'am, and which I think every Indian will always remember, is the Milind Soman snake Madhu Sapre one.
Yeah,
and that I think defines for me how creativity can be used for something that can be remembered across time and generations. People haven't forgotten that. Yeah. And then we, of course, have those ads that we saw in the 90s on Doordarshan that people haven't forgotten. The Nirma jingle, for example.
And the Hamara Bajaj.
And we don't see ads like that anymore. I mean, we don't have these ads that people will remember across time. But if you can go back to some of the ads that you have worked on, did you work on both print and TV?
Yeah. Those days there was no division.
Okay.
Between and print was equally important, and doing a TV commercial in those days was like, finding the holy grail, literally. Today, everyone does a TV commercial or a video in 5 minutes, and you use AI or whatever, and all of them look alike. But those days it was based on very, very strong consumer insights. So a few of the campaigns that I remember, which not done by me, but which I remember from those times, which really stays in my head. One was that Vico Vajradanti. It had the most irritating jingle.
Did you do that?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
These are not my campaigns.
Okay.
But these were the ones which stood the test of time. That jingle is like a burr in my head. You never forget it. That was one. And then the Hamara Bajaj campaign was very, very well sustained over time. Again, I don't know whether it was the music. And even when Titan started, we used to see some of the Titan ads. I like the Titan jingle very much. The ads were okay. But what was very interesting was there were certain symbols, logos, music, mnemonics, which kind of stuck. That stickiness doesn't exist today. Now it's about buying today and forgetting about you tomorrow. And I think that is a big change that advertising has to go through. So whether you're a content creator or an influencer, you have to build stickiness, which comes through a relationship, right? And not through transactions. So I'm not interested whether you buy 3 units. I'm interested that you buy 3 plus 3 plus 3 and then recommend me to 12 of your friends and family, right? And you become what I call a peer influencer. I think that is the future. So I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, And we were realizing that brands are getting commoditized. Right? And why do people build emotional connects with the brands? Because of the why. Because the brand has that answers your why and the brand's why kind of connect. And I think that is going to be the future. Your content creators, all of them need to fit in to build this why and build this stickiness, not transactions.
And something that sticks to the memory, right? And
Absolutely.
is not forgotten.
It's like a burr in the head. Talking about the campaigns that I remember, the ones I actually did, there were 2 or 3 ads that we created for HMT Watches, which were done by Prahlad Kakar. We were talking about gifting. So those, I remember we had Nandini Sen, we had Dilipta Hill, and Prahlad Kakar shot those for us in Mumbai. There were a set of 3 commercials on gifting for HMT, which I remember with great fondness. The other very funny experience I had was when we tried to humanize HP printers, right? I was working with HP at that point. And we created this little baby commercial with a small little fellow. He must have been 6 months old. And we said that the HP prints were so realistic that they put his mother's picture in front of him and he went to sleep smiling, right? So it was amazingly lifelike prints. That was the line. Now, what was very funny was this little young man who was all of, I think, 6 months old, went to sleep in the middle of the shoot. And there were we, about 25 of us, just hanging about, waiting for our young man to open his eyes again and start reshooting. And we spent about, I think, 6-8 hours waiting for him to get up.
Why won't you wake him up? Because
we couldn't. It's cruel. And he's a baby. So there are very, very strict rules when you shoot babies and animals, right? So that was one. The other one was, I remember when we shot, that was HMT. I did that for BPL. We did a whole bunch of things on washing machines, which are the most boring product, but we actually made it come alive. And then I did a whole bunch of stuff. By then I'd started my B2B agency and my healthcare agency. So we didn't have sexy consumer products to work with. We had to work with spark plugs. And I remember we did an amazing campaign for Bosch spark plugs. Those days it was called Myco. And they were really funny and very cute, short 15-seconders on how, you need, the baby gets born in the car because the car doesn't start. It didn't have either a Bosch battery or the scooter doesn't start. So because it didn't have a spark plug. So those were funny. We tried to make spark plugs human because those are all what I call DKDC products. They're under the bonnet. People don't know which battery or spark plug you use, right? So we were trying to build awareness for that. So that was a fun thing we did. Of course, we did all the teas and the coffees and all of that. And then I did quite a few ads for Infosys for their recruitment piece. So, but what excited me most, and I worked with most of the B2B companies as well, Reliance included, was making boring stuff. B2B is not the sexy part of advertising, right? So how did you make that interesting? How did you make that come alive? And I believe that campaigns don't need to win. I mean, it's nice if you win at Cannes, but the bigger part is, do they win in the marketplace? And that's always been my philosophy. So anything I built or did always did very well for the client in the marketplace. That was my mantra, to succeed.
Yeah.
And to build brands, you need to actually win in the marketplace, not awards really, and not transactions, but long-term emotional bonding with the client. That's why I say that the heart of branding is to build love marks where the client loves you and respects you because your product delivers.
Amazing. Ma'am, you have been a woman leader at a time where there were fewer women in the workplace. Now, of course, there are more and more women coming and you mentor many of them. What is your, if you had to give a piece of advice to women and especially women founders, what would it be?
Okay. Um, I'm going to be politically incorrect here, but one of the things I strongly believe in is not using gender as a barrier. Right? I grew up in a generation, 4 generations ago, actually, where there were no women, very, very few women. And I was in advertising, which was completely male dominated, still is, I think. But the thing that I believe in strongly, one is never make gender a barrier. And if you don't see it as a barrier, others don't. If you make it a barrier, others see you as a woman. The other thing that I have always followed is knowledge is power, which is why the glass ceiling has never really bothered me, because I did my homework and I knew more about any subject that I had to speak about. I did my homework, I worked hard, and I learned. The only thing that stands you in good stead ultimately and sort of overcomes all these barriers is knowledge. And I believe strongly that knowledge is power. I also think, I mean, I'm not saying completely, I'm not saying that it is not a problem. It is. But I think women and women founders, because I work on both sides, training them at the nth hour is not a solution. And then calling them diversity hires is definitely not a solution. Women need to be empowered from day one. And I think this empowerment starts when you're born, right? I don't think it can happen later in life because you're already indoctrinated.
Absolutely
Right?
correct.
So it has to, families have to realize that the girl child is just like the boy child. And you have to start empowering women from day one, right? So what I always tell parents, because I also counsel a lot of parents, is that if you want your girl to come up in life, don't put boundaries of gender on her. Tell her that she can do anything a man can, right? And as well, but she's got to work hard, perhaps a little harder. That's still, there is a piece of inequality there. You have to work harder, but nothing is actually impossible. And I'm very blessed that I come from a family where all the women, and this was even my grandmother and my great grandmother's generation, were actually empowered. And in fact, my mother used to tell me this. She said, don't be such a girl. There's nothing that you can't do if you want to. So I was always brought up in that atmosphere, which has been very good for me, I know. But for all the young women who don't have that kind of freedom, you have to build it. You have to build it. Does it happen overnight? Of course not. It's like, this water method, drop by drop by drop. You have to be a little patient, especially if you come from a very conservative, traditional background. Things are changing, and I'm very happy to see that. But if it isn't changing as fast, it won't change fast because it's a mindset, but work at it. And my advice to all the young women out there, keep working at it because it does change. And I can actually see it because I'm much older than all of you. So I've seen how things have changed.
Absolutely.
But you have to be very patient. Nothing happens in a hurry, believe me, especially these traditional ways of thinking.
Yeah.
Don't go away very quickly. So, but you have to push, and then suddenly it happens. And you're pushing so hard, you don't realize it's actually changed.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree because I come from a family where I'm the only child and I'm the girl child. So I never really knew the difference between how a boy is raised and versus how a girl is raised. And that I think has helped. But I see sometimes that even when there are siblings, the boy is told to go out and take the risks and do those things. And the girl is asked to, be a little docile and stay at home. And I don't think that works, because you're from very early on, you're making that difference. And that kind of then stays. But I think it's changing really fast.
Yeah.
And women now are, probably more aggressive than men sometimes to our detriment. So, ma'am, we will be coming back to the Gen Zs and Millennials and your career advice for them, because they are in a state of flux now. Whatever they studied, whatever they were told is changing so fast, with technology outpacing education, perhaps sometimes. What is your way of looking at the future of work for these kids who are entering the workforce? What should they be looking out for that kind of is going to stay on and make them relevant even 30 years down the line, where technology has grown to an extent we can't imagine?
Well, Um, I think the first thing is that I'm speaking specifically about a management degree here. The MBA is not the end as it's treated today. So people, and this really bothers me as an educationist, education is not the end. The degree, I'm not saying education, the degree is not the end of life. The degree just gives you a framework to explore. And I don't think we do enough of that, because the society forces us to say, you got MBA, you got job, life is done. The MBA is just, according to me, the stepping stone, and it was for me, a stepping stone, a framework, and it gave me a whole lot of stuff that I could think about. So I want you to treat an MBA or any other educational qualification not as a means to a job, right? But as a stepping stone to exploring opportunities. It gives you so many possibilities, right? Education is all about possibilities. For example, when I was doing my science graduation, I never thought I'd end up being a corporate leader. I would have perhaps been, if I'd followed my normal trajectory, I would have had a PhD in mathematics and I'd have been a college teacher. And look where I am. And that's because I opened my mind, and my life also took many strange turns and twists, but I followed that. And I always believe that all the education, including my physics, my maths degree, my science degree, and my MBA, have made me see a lot of possibilities. And I think that is what education is all about. So my advice to all of you young people, education doesn't stop. Never. It never stops. The moment you stop learning, you're dead in the mind. And I think that's worse than dying physically, right? The moment you stop thinking, stop learning, stop exploring, you actually, a part of you withers away, So keep learning. And as you grow, you need to reskill. So just to give you an example, the way I used to teach 30 years ago and the way I teach today are very, very different, because my audience has changed. My consumer has changed. So one of the things that you all need to do is to actually keep reskilling, keep understanding what's happening. And that way you win over the bots, because your generation, the biggest challenge is not your cohorts or other people in the same boat. It's going to be the bots. And they're distinctly more, they're much more methodical, and they have access to so much data.
Ma'am, you want to share that story about the best employee?
Yeah. Let me do that. This was a very funny story and a very frightening one that I heard from a relative of mine who runs a large finance company in the US. And they had this particular employee who never came on camera. And they used to keep wondering why, because this guy used to win every award, right? He used to win every award. He was best employee. He had the best results, all of that. And they found, after a lot of some red flags got raised because he never come on camera. And then they found that he was actually a bot being, supported by some foreign government. And they found that he was not the only one. And when he went to the cybercrime to tell them this was the case, he found that there were 40 or 50 other cases where people said that their best employees who won all the awards were actually bots. And that was very frightening, but they were very successful. And that's the frightening part. Your generation is going to face that. Are you going to collapse? No. That is where the consumer insighting and that human element comes into play. So you need to embrace technology. And if I can do it at my age, you can. You are digital natives. I wasn't. So embrace the technology, but don't let the technology consume you or kill your head, kill your mind. That is the most important thing. Use it as a tool and a buddy, but don't use it as a substitute because it makes you very lazy. See, technology has a negative side. You can become very lazy, right? Because it writes your mails for you, does everything for you. Never do that. Use it as a tool, and even if it does do some of the grunge work for you, always oversee it and add that human layer which is unique to you.
How lovely. Thank you so much, ma'am, for coming on this podcast. And I hope you had fun
Of course, I did. I love talking, as you can see.
And you're very, very good at it. So thank you, everyone, for listening in. And as I said, it's not every day that we get to have such a deep dive chat with ma'am about her life. And privileged to have you here with us, ma'am, today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And all the best to you. I want to wish you all success and happiness. I don't wish that people get rich. I always wish them success and happiness. And may you achieve what you set out to do. God bless. Thank you, Shri.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.